text message sent to the wrong number. 5 words spoken in a language that shouldn't exist, and a Korean Mafia boss who just discovered that the invisible woman cleaning his floors knows secrets that could destroy empires. Tonight, in a glass tower where power is measured in blood, Cassandra Gabriel will greet the matriarch of the Kang Syndicate in a royal dialect so ancient, so forbidden, that grown men with body counts will drop to their knees. What did she say that made a killer's mother weep? And how does a night shift cleaner from Chicago speak like exiled royalty? Stay with me. This is the story of a woman who became a queen by accident, and the silent viper who couldn't let her go. Welcome to Ruthless Romance Tales, and honey, you just stepped into something you can't walk away from. If you've been riding with me, you know we don't do ordinary here, we do obsession. We do danger. We do the kind of connection that rewrites your entire existence when you least expect it. And if you're new, lock in, because what you're about to witness is a single moment that will shatter 2 lives and rebuild them into something terrifying and beautiful. Hit that like button like it's the only lifeline you've got. Subscribe because you're about to get addicted, and smash that notification bell, because missing the next chapter of Cassandra and Min Jun's story would haunt you forever. Now let's watch how one invisible woman brought an entire empire to its knees with nothing but her voice. The Kang Plaza wasn't just a building. It was a statement carved in steel and glass, 60 floors of legitimate business concealing an empire built on fear. The lobby gleamed with marble imported from Italy. The elevators were lined with mirrors that reflected only what they wanted you to see, and every surface was polished to a shine that hurt the eyes. It was beautiful in the way a blade is beautiful, cold and perfect and deadly. By day, it housed tech startups and venture capital firms. By night, it belonged to Kang Min-jun, the man they called the Silent Viper, and the cleaning crew who knew better than to ask questions. Cassandra Gabriel had perfected the art of being invisible. At 3 a.m, the Kang Plaza belonged to people like her, the cleaners, the maintenance workers, the ones who kept the billion-dollar illusion running while the powerful slept. She moved through the executive levels with practiced efficiency, her cartwheels silent on marble floors, her eyes always down, her presence forgettable by design. She'd learned early that in buildings like this, being noticed was dangerous, being remembered was worse. She shouldn't have been on the 58th floor. Her assignment covered 40 through 55, but Marcus from the day crew had called in sick, and someone needed to handle the executive suites before the morning shift arrived. So here she was, in territory she didn't know, surrounded by offices that held secrets she didn't want to understand. She cleaned quickly, mechanically, trying not to look at the expensive art or the panoramic views of Chicago sprawling below like a conquered kingdom. In the private restroom adjacent to the corner office, she found it. A small SIM card, gold-plated edges catching the light, lying beside the sink like someone had removed it in a hurry and forgotten it. She almost left it. Almost. But her supervisor had drilled it into her head. Anything left behind could be a test, a trap, evidence that she wasn't thorough. She picked it up, slipped it into her uniform pocket, and finished her shift. The stairwell was her shortcut, the ghost path that saved 10 minutes on her route. She was halfway between floors when she heard footsteps echoing above her, heavy, deliberate, familiar in the worst way. Her blood turned to ice. Dante. Her ex-boyfriend. The man she'd fled from 6 months ago. The man whose restraining order apparently meant nothing when desperation made him bold. He came down the stairs like judgment itself, his face twisted with rage and something darker, fear. Maybe. Or the kind of desperation that made men dangerous. You think you can just disappear, Cassie? You think I can't find you? His hand shot out, grabbing her right arm with crushing force. I need your badge. I need it now, or they're going to kill me. She tried to pull away, tried to scream, but his grip tightened, his other hand slamming her arm against the metal railing with sickening force. The pain was white-hot, blinding, the sound of bone cracking against steel echoing in the concrete shaft. She felt something give way, felt her arm bend at an angle that bones weren't meant to bend, and then he was ripping the badge from her uniform, her security clearance disappearing into his pocket as he ran, leaving her crumpled on the landing, gasping, broken. The pain came in waves, each one worse than the last. She needed help, needed medical attention, needed someone, anyone, to know she was here. Her phone. Where was her phone? She found it in her pocket, pulled it up with her good hand, but there was no signal in the stairwell, just empty bars mocking her desperation. The SIM card, the one she'd found. Maybe it would give her signal. Maybe it was active. Maybe it was her only chance. Her fingers shook as she removed her SIM and inserted the gold-plated one, praying it would work. The phone registered the new card. Signal bars appeared 3 bars. Enough. She pulled up her contacts, trying to find the emergency clinic number she'd saved, but her vision was blurring with pain and tears. She typed desperately. He crushed my arm. Room 4B. Help. But in her agony, she didn't notice the auto-suggestion that popped up a saved contact on the SIM card labeled simply Ju-sen, main line. Her trembling finger hit send before she could verify the number. The message disappeared into the digital void, and Cassandra collapsed against the cold concrete, cradling her ruined arm, praying that whoever received her message would care enough to send help. She had no way of knowing she'd just texted the most dangerous man in Chicago. No way of knowing that the SIM card in her hand belonged to a dead man. No way of knowing that her invisibility, her one protection, had just shattered completely. Above her, the building hummed with its usual indifferent rhythm, and in a penthouse 60 floors up, a phone that should never vibrate again began to buzz. Kang Min-jun was a man who controlled chaos through ritual. At 3:30 in the morning, while his empire slept, he sat in his penthouse study performing the meditation that kept him sharp, disassembling and cleaning his weapons with methodical precision. The Beretta lay in component pieces on black cloth, each part reflecting the amber light from his desk lamp. This was how he thought, how he planned, how he made sense of a world that required constant vigilance. The Ghostline terminal, a secure monitoring device connected to his network of operatives, sat silent on his desk. It tracked every phone and SIM card issued to his people, alerting him to unusual activity, breaches, compromises. It had been dark for 3 hours, which meant his organization was running smoothly, his people following protocol, his enemies still in the shadows where they belonged. Then it lit up. A red alert flashed across the screen. SIM card #7 deceased operative Yan Taeyang signal active. Min-jun's hands stilled over the weapon. That SIM card should not exist. He'd watched Taeyang die 4 hours ago, watched his second-in-command remove the SIM and destroy it per protocol. Yet somehow, impossibly, it was transmitting. From inside his building, a message notification appeared. Min-jun's jaw tightened as he read the words that should never have been sent to this number. He crushed my arm. Room 4B. Help. The message was wrong in every way. The ghost line didn't receive pleas for help, it delivered death sentences. The number wasn't listed anywhere. Wasn't connected to any emergency service. Existed only as a secure contact between his inner circle. Yet, someone had it. Someone was using a dead man's SIM card to cry out into darkness. And that someone was in his tower right now. Min-jun pulled up the building's security grid, cross-referencing the SIM signal location. 4th floor, maintenance level, stairwell B. He could send his security team, could delegate this like he delegated everything. But this breach was intimate, personal in its violation. Someone had penetrated his inner circle's communication network, and he needed to see with his own eyes what kind of threat or fool had stumbled into his web. He took the private elevator down, his mind running through possibilities. A trap, a test of his security, a rival organization's infiltration attempt. Each scenario required a different response, and Min-jun prided himself on his ability to read situations with perfect clarity. What he found in stairwell B shattered every assumption. She was curled on the concrete landing between floors, her body folded in on itself, one arm cradled against her chest at an angle that made something cold slide down Min-jun's spine. A woman. A cleaner, based on the gray uniform. Young, black, alone, clearly in agony. Her face was tear-streaked, her breathing shallow and rapid, her dark skin ashen with shock. A phone, her phone, with the gold SIM card visible in the open slot, lay on the ground beside her, screen dark, her lifeline extinguished. She didn't hear him approach. Didn't see him crouch beside her until his shadow fell across her body, and then her eyes flew open with pure animal terror. She knew who he was. Everyone in his building knew who he was, and she knew she was about to die. Don't move. His voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that preceded violence. Min-jun reached for her injured arm, and she whimpered, trying to pull away, but there was nowhere to go. Her back was already against the wall, her body trapped between concrete and the man who controlled her fate. I said don't move. He examined the arm with clinical detachment. Broken. Recently. Deliberately. The kind of injury that came from force applied with intent. Who did this? Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. Min-jun waited with infinite patience. Finally, she managed to whisper. Ex-boyfriend. He wanted my access badge. The words landed like a grenade. Min-jun's gaze snapped to her uniform shirt, to the empty clip where her employee ID should have been. His mind raced through implications with brutal efficiency. The badge would grant access to service corridors, to blind spots in his security system, to areas where someone smart could plant surveillance, or worse, his building was being breached from the inside, and the woman shaking in front of him was the unwitting key. Where is he now? I don't know. He ran. Took the badge and ran. Her voice broke. I just needed help. I found the SIM card upstairs while cleaning. I thought it was trash. I thought someone would send medical. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Minjun studied her face, searching for deception, for the calculated manipulation of a plant, but all he saw was genuine terror and the exhaustion of someone who'd been surviving on margins for too long. She was telling the truth, which meant she had no idea she'd just texted the most dangerous number in Chicago, had no idea the SIM card she'd found belonged to a corpse, had no idea her ex-boyfriend's desperation had just triggered a security breach that would require blood to resolve. He made a decision, slid his arms beneath her, one under her knees, one supporting her back, and lifted her off the cold floor. She gasped, her good hand instinctively clutching his shirt, her body rigid with pain and confusion. What are you doing? Her voice was barely audible. Taking you somewhere you can answer questions without passing out. He carried her toward the service elevator, her weight barely registering against his strength. She smelled like industrial cleaner and fear sweat and something softer underneath that reminded him of humanity in a world where he'd forgotten what that felt like. The elevator doors closed, sealing them in the small space. Her breathing was rapid against his chest, her fingers twisted in his shirt like an anchor. He looked down at her, this ghost of a woman who'd accidentally reached into his darkness and pulled him toward something he couldn't yet name. Your badge gives access to maintenance corridors on floors 40 through 60, Minjun said, his voice devoid of emotion. If your ex knows what he's doing, he'll use it to bypass security checkpoints. He'll plant surveillance, steal information. Maybe worse. He paused, letting the weight settle on her. You didn't just call the wrong number, Cassandra. You handed a weapon to my enemies, and then invited me to watch you bleed. She shook her head weakly. I didn't mean to. Intent doesn't matter. Consequence does. The elevator opened on the penthouse level. He carried her through the foyer, past guards who knew better than to question, into a space where her fate would be decided. You just became the most dangerous woman in this city. Because now you're my problem. And I don't leave problems unsolved. Cassandra didn't remember the doctor arriving, didn't remember the sedation, the careful manipulation of shattered bone, the hours that passed in medicated darkness while her body tried to process trauma and terror in equal measure. She woke to unfamiliar softness, her mind struggling through fog to make sense of where she was and how she'd gotten there. The room was glass and light. 3 walls of floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Chicago at dawn, the sky bleeding pink and gold across the skyline. She was in a bed that felt like sleeping on clouds, wrapped in sheets with a thread count that probably exceeded her monthly salary. Her right arm was heavy, encased in a pristine white cast from wrist to elbow. She was wearing a silk robe she didn't recognize, emerald green and impossibly soft against her skin. Through an open archway, no door, she realized with creeping unease. No barrier at all, she could see into an adjacent suite. Minjun stood with his back to her, one hand braced against a bar cart, the other bringing a glass of amber liquid to his lips. He was still wearing the same black clothing from before, but his jacket was gone, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. He hadn't slept. Had he been watching her all night? Cassandra sat up slowly, and the movement caught his attention. He turned, his dark eyes finding her across the shared space with unnerving precision. He didn't speak, just watched her process her surroundings, watched her realize that there was no privacy, no escape, no barrier except 10 feet of marble floor between his domain and hers. You sedated me. Her voice came out hoarse, accusatory. The doctor sedated you. I watched. Minjun took another sip of scotch, his gaze never leaving her face. You needed surgery. He set the bone, stabilized the fracture, ensured you wouldn't lose function. You should be grateful. Where's my phone? My things? Survival instincts screamed at her to run, but her body felt sluggish, heavy. You can't just keep me here, can't I? He moved toward the archway, stepping into her space with casual confidence. You texted a dead man's number. Your ex-boyfriend has an access badge that can compromise my security. And in approximately 3 hours, my mother will arrive expecting to meet a woman who proves I haven't lost my edge. He stopped at the foot of her bed, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Tell me, Cassandra, where exactly do you think you're going? Her pulse hammered. I don't know anything about your security. I'm just a cleaner. You were a cleaner. Now you're a liability, or an asset. That depends entirely on what you tell me in the next 5 minutes. He set his glass on the nightstand with deliberate care, then braced his hands on either side of her legs, caging her in without touching. His face was inches from hers, close enough that she could see the faint scar through his eyebrow, the dangerous beauty that made him both magnetic and terrifying. "Your ex-boyfriend, tell me everything." The heat radiating off his body was suffocating. She could smell scotch on his breath mixed with something clean and sharp. "His name is Dante Morales. We dated for 6 months. He was controlling, possessive. When I tried to leave, he got worse. I filed a restraining order. But paper doesn't stop desperate men. Why does he want your badge?" Each word was silk over steel. "I don't know. He said he owed money to someone. Said he needed into this building or they'd kill him." Humiliation burned her throat. He grabbed me in the stairwell, twisted my arm until I thought it would snap. I managed to break free, but he got the badge. Minjun's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You let a peasant break what belongs to my building. That makes you complicit. That makes you a debt I haven't decided how to collect." I didn't let him do anything. Anger sparked through fear. He's stronger than me. Meaner. I survived. That's all I could do. Something flickered across his face, gone before she could name it. He straightened, putting distance between them, and she felt the loss of his proximity like a physical thing. Survival is not enough in my world. You need to be strategic, ruthless. You need to understand that every choice has a consequence. And right now, your consequence is my mother. He moved to a closet, pulling out a dress the color of deep jade silk that caught the morning light like liquid emerald. "Put this on. Fix your hair. Bathrooms through that door. You have 2 hours." Cassandra stared at the dress, mind reeling. "Why are you doing this? Why not just turn me over to the police?" Minjun paused in the archway, his silhouette framed against the window. "Because you're not as invisible as you think you are. Because my mother is coming to judge whether I've grown weak, and I need her to see strength. And because when I look at you, I see someone who's been underestimated their entire life." He turned, eyes locking onto hers with intensity that stole her breath. "Tonight, you're going to prove that everyone who overlooked you was a fool. You're going to stand beside me and make them believe you belong. And if you fail, Cassandra, the man who broke your arm will be the least of your problems." He left then, disappearing into his suite, leaving her alone with a silk dress and the terrifying realization that she was no longer invisible. She'd been seen, and in Minjun's world, being seen was the same as being claimed. 20 minutes later, Cassandra stood in front of a mirror that reflected a woman she didn't recognize. The jade silk clung to her curves with devastating precision, the fabric whispering against her skin like a secret. Her natural hair, which she'd always kept severely pulled back, now framed her face in soft coils that softened her features and made her look less like a ghost and more like someone who deserved to be seen. The cast on her arm was the only jarring element, a reminder that this transformation was built on pain and circumstance, not choice. The elevator chimed. Cassandra's heart lurched into her throat. Through the glass walls, she watched Minjun emerge from his suite, his posture rigid with a tension she was beginning to recognize as the mask he wore for the world. He'd changed into a black suit that made him look like violence wrapped in respectability, and when his eyes found her, something dangerous flickered in their depths before he shuttered it away. "She's early." His voice was clipped, controlled. "Remember what I told you. You're a guest, an associate. You speak only when addressed, and you never, ever show weakness." He moved to her, his hand settling at the small of her back with possessive familiarity that made her skin burn through the silk. "She will try to break you. That's what she does. That's how she measures worth." The elevator opened again, and the air in the penthouse changed. It became thinner, colder, charged with the kind of authority that didn't need to announce itself because it simply was. Madame Kang stepped into the foyer like a queen surveying conquered territory, and Cassandra understood immediately why Minjun was afraid. This woman was beauty carved from winter itself, ageless and elegant in a way that transcended time. Her hair was swept into an immaculate chignon, her charcoal dress tailored to perfection, and her eyes were chips of obsidian that assessed and dismissed in the same glance. Behind her stood a man who could only be Jiro, Minjun's head of security. He was broad-shouldered and stone-faced, his suit doing nothing to disguise the violence coiled in his frame. But it was his eyes that made Cassandra's stomach twist. When he looked at her, she saw nothing but contempt, the kind of disdain reserved for things that didn't belong and never would. Madame Kang spoke in rapid Korean, her voice melodic and poisonous, and Minjun responded in the same language, his tone deferential in a way Cassandra had never heard from him. The exchange lasted 30 seconds, and then those black eyes swiveled to Cassandra like a blade finding flesh. This is your guest." It wasn't a question. Madame Kang approached with measured steps, circling Cassandra the way a predator circles prey, taking in every detail with surgical assessment. "She's injured. How careless." "An accident." Minjun's hand pressed harder against Cassandra's back, a warning and an anchor. "Nothing that will interfere with her duties." "Duties?" Madame Kang laughed, the sound like ice cracking. What duties could this girl possibly perform that couldn't be done better by someone more suitable? She stopped directly in front of Cassandra, close enough that Cassandra could smell jasmine and something sharper, more medicinal. "Look at me, child." Cassandra lifted her eyes, forcing herself to meet that pitiless gaze. Madame Kang's expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted, a challenge issued and received. "We'll take tea in the dining room." Madame Kang swept past them both, Jiro following like a shadow. Minjun's hand slipped from Cassandra's back, and the absence felt like abandonment. He leaned close, his breath ghosting against her ear. "Survive the next hour. That's all I'm asking." The dining room was set with porcelain so delicate it looked like it would shatter if someone breathed wrong. Madame Kang took the head of the table, Minjun to her right, and Cassandra was directed to the left, positioned like an afterthought. Jiro stood behind his employer, his eyes never leaving Cassandra, his judgment a physical weight. Tea was poured by silent staff who appeared and vanished like smoke. Madame Kang sipped hers with practiced grace, then set the cup down with a click that sounded like a gavel. "Tell me, girl, how did you meet my son?" Cassandra's throat was dry. "I work in the building, cleaning services." "A cleaner." The word dripped with disdain. "How enterprising of Minjun to elevate the help. Tell me, do you have any skills beyond scrubbing floors?" The cast on Cassandra's arm throbbed with phantom pain, a reminder of every time someone had underestimated her, dismissed her, treated her like she was nothing. She felt Minjun's eyes on her, watching, waiting to see if she'd crumble, but something in her refused to give this woman the satisfaction. "I learn quickly. I adapt. I survive." Cassandra's voice was steady, each word carefully measured. Those seemed like valuable skills in any environment. Madame Kang's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it had contained any warmth. "Survival. How pedestrian." She gestured to a servant, who placed a teapot directly in front of Cassandra. "Pour for us. Let's see how well you've adapted to your new station." It was a trap. Cassandra could feel it in the way Jiro's posture shifted, in the way Minjun went utterly still. The teapot was heavy, ornate, and her right arm was useless in its cast. Madame Kang knew this. She was testing whether Cassandra would falter, whether she'd show weakness, whether she'd prove she was exactly what the older woman believed her to be, refuse dressed in silk. Cassandra reached for the pot with her left hand, her movements careful and deliberate. The weight was substantial, the angle awkward, and she could feel the strain in her shoulder as she lifted it. Her injured arm twinged in protest, sweat beading at her temples, but she refused to let it show on her face. She poured Madame Kang's tea first, the liquid flowing smooth and steady, not a drop spilled, then Minjun's, then her own. She set the pot down without a sound and met Madame Kang's eyes. "Is there anything else you require?" For the first time, something like interest flickered in that cold gaze. "We'll see." The tea had gone cold. Cassandra could feel it in the weight of the silence that had settled over the table like fog, oppressive and dangerous. Madame Kang had stopped testing her with small cruelties, and had moved into something far more calculated, asking questions designed to expose ignorance, to prove that Cassandra was exactly what she appeared to be, a woman out of her depth, playing dress-up in a world that would devour her whole. Minjun had excused himself 15 minutes ago, called away by an urgent matter that Cassandra suspected was manufactured, a test within a test. Now it was just her, Madame Kang, and Jiro standing sentinel behind his employer like a promise of violence. The older woman's expression had shifted from mild interest to something sharper, more predatory, as if she'd finally decided that Cassandra wasn't worth the effort of pretense. Madame Kang leaned toward Jiro, her movements graceful and deliberate, and when she spoke, it was in a language that sounded like music from another century. The words were Korean, but not the Korean Cassandra had heard Minjun speak. This was older, more formal, each syllable carrying the weight of court tradition and royal ceremony. The cadence was haunting, beautiful in the way ancient things are beautiful, and Cassandra's blood turned to ice as she caught the meaning. "Once my son leaves the room completely, take this girl to the basement level. Finish what her lover started. Make it look like an accident during building maintenance. She's seen too much, and she's nothing but a liability dressed in borrowed silk." Jiro's hand moved almost imperceptibly toward his jacket, his face impassive but his intent crystal clear. He understood. He would obey, and Cassandra would disappear like she'd never existed. Another ghost in a building full of them. Except Cassandra understood too. Every word, every nuance, every archaic turn of phrase that hadn't been spoken outside of historical dramas and the fading memories of exiled nobility. She'd learned this dialect 3 years ago from a woman named Lady Seo Yeon-hee, a resident at the nursing home where Cassandra had worked night shifts before the Kang Plaza. Lady Seo had been 93, sharp as broken glass, and desperate for someone to hear her stories before she died. She'd been a lady in waiting to the last empress, exiled after the fall, living in obscurity in America for 70 years, with a language dying on her tongue. Cassandra had listened, had learned, had absorbed the royal dialect like a lifeline, because it was the only thing that made Lady Seo smile in those final months. And now, impossibly, that dead language was about to save her life. She set her teacup down with a sharp clack that shattered the silence. The sound made Madame Kang's eyes snap toward her, irritation flashing across that perfect face. But before the older woman could speak, Cassandra opened her mouth and let the ancient words flow. Honorable Mother, the Viper's house is already stained with enough low-born blood. Do you truly wish to add the blood of a woman who knows your family's oldest secrets to the foundation? The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Madame Kang's face went pale, all color draining as if Cassandra had struck her. Jiro's hand, which had been moving toward his weapon, froze, mid-motion, and then slowly, deliberately, he stepped back and bowed. Not a casual bow, a formal bow, the kind reserved for royalty or those who carried royal authority in their voice. He bowed not to Madame Kang, not to Min Jun's memory, but to the language itself, to the power it represented. Madame Kang's lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked like she was seeing a ghost, and perhaps in a way she was. The royal dialect had died with the old kingdom, preserved only in the memories of those who'd served the court before its fall. To hear it spoken by a young black woman in a Chicago penthouse was impossible, unthinkable. And yet here it was, flowing from Cassandra's lips with the proper inflection, the correct honorifics, the rhythm of someone who'd been taught by a master. Who taught you? Madame Kang's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a woman whose entire worldview had just been shattered. Cassandra kept her expression neutral, but inside, her heart was racing with the kind of adrenaline that comes from standing on a cliff edge and choosing to fly. I was taught by Lady Seo Yeon-hee in her final days. She made me swear I would carry her language into the next generation, that I would never let it die in silence. She paused, letting the weight of that name settle. She told me stories of the palace, of the empress she served, of the codes and secrets that were whispered in this dialect, so that even Korean speakers couldn't understand. She said that anyone who knew this language carried the blood memory of the throne, regardless of their birth. Madame Kang's hands were trembling, actually trembling. This woman who'd walked in like winter incarnate was now visibly shaken, and Jiro looked like he'd been struck by lightning, his professional mask cracking to reveal something close to reverence. Lady Seo. Madame Kang repeated the name like a prayer. She was my mother's cousin. She vanished after the war. We thought she'd died. The older woman stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor, and for the first time since entering the penthouse, she looked at Cassandra not with disdain but with something far more complex. Fear, respect, calculation. You carry her legacy. That makes you untouchable by the old codes. That makes you... The elevator chimed. Min Jun stepped out, his eyes immediately scanning the room, reading the tension like a language of its own. He looked at his mother's pale face, at Jiro's rigid posture, at Cassandra sitting calmly with her hands folded in her lap, like she'd just survived an execution by speaking the words of the dead. What happened? Min Jun's voice was steel wrapped in silk, his gaze moving between the three of them, searching for blood, for broken things, for evidence of the disaster he'd clearly expected to return to. Madame Kang turned to her son, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight Cassandra hadn't heard before. We need to talk, privately, about the girl. She looked back at Cassandra, her expression unreadable, about what she represents. Min Jun's eyes locked onto Cassandra's, questions burning in their depths, but he simply nodded. Jiro, escort Miss Gabriel back to her suite. Make sure she has everything she needs. The emphasis on the word needs was deliberate, a command disguised as courtesy. As Cassandra stood, her legs shaking with the aftermath of adrenaline, she caught Min Jun's gaze one more time, and in his eyes, she saw something new. Not just interest, not just suspicion, but hunger, the kind of hunger that comes from discovering something rare, Something valuable, something worth keeping. Cassandra barely made it back to the glass suite before Min Jun appeared in the archway, his presence filling the space like a storm about to break. His mother had left through the private elevator 10 minutes ago, her departure marked by a silence so heavy it felt like the building itself was holding its breath. Now it was just the two of them, and the air between them crackled with something dangerous and electric. My office. Now. His voice was quiet, controlled, but Cassandra could hear the edge beneath it. The barely leashed intensity of a man who'd just had his entire understanding of someone rewritten. He didn't wait for her response, just turned and walked back through the archway, expecting her to follow. She did. Because what choice did she have? Because some part of her wanted to see what happened next, wanted to know what kind of fire she'd just walked into by speaking words that should have stayed buried with the past. His office was all dark wood and leather, walls lined with books in multiple languages and art that probably had its own security detail. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, but Min Jun wasn't looking at the view. He was looking at her, his eyes tracking every movement as she stepped inside, as the door clicked shut behind her with a finality that made her pulse jump. How long have you known? His voice was barely above a whisper, but it hit her like a physical force. How long have you been walking through my building, cleaning my floors, speaking a language that could have saved your life at any moment, and you chose to stay silent? Cassandra's back was against the door now, though she didn't remember moving. I didn't know it mattered. Lady Sio taught me because she was lonely, because I was the only one who'd listened to her stories. I didn't know your family had any connection to the royal court. I didn't know. You didn't know. Min Jun moved toward her with predatory grace, each step measured and deliberate. But you know now. You know that my mother was ready to have you killed, and you stopped her with words older than this country's independence. You know that you just made yourself invaluable and impossibly dangerous in the same breath. He stopped inches from her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his body, could see the muscle ticking in his jaw. Every time I think I've seen all of you, you find a new way to make me question everything I thought I knew. Cassandra's breath caught. There was something raw in his expression, something vulnerable beneath the control, and it terrified her more than his anger ever could. I'm still just a cleaner who got caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. No. His hand came up, fingers ghosting along her jawline without quite touching, the space between them charged with tension so thick she could taste it. You were never just anything. I saw it the first time I found you on that floor. You were afraid, broken, desperate, but you looked me in the eye and you didn't flinch. His thumb brushed across her lower lip, featherlight, and her entire body went rigid with awareness. You're a survivor wearing a ghost's disguise, and I've been too blind to see it. A sharp knock shattered the moment. Min Jun stepped back, his expression shuddering instantly, the vulnerable man vanishing behind the mask of the silent viper. Enter. Jiro pushed through the door, his face grim, a tablet clutched in his hand. We found him, Dante Morales. He's been in contact with the UA Triad since he took the badge. They're planning something for tonight. Min Jun's entire demeanor changed, shifting from the man who'd been about to kiss her to the ruthless strategist who'd built an empire on calculated violence. Where is he? Warehouse District, North Side. Our people have him contained, but he's not cooperating. Jiro's eyes flicked to Cassandra, something unreadable in their depths. He's asking for her. Says he has information he'll only share if she's present. Cassandra's stomach twisted. The thought of seeing Dante again, of being in the same room with the man who'd crushed her arm and stolen her security, made bile rise in her throat. But Min Jun was already moving, pulling up surveillance feeds on his phone, his mind clearly racing through scenarios and contingencies. He's leverage. Min Jun's voice was cold, analytical. The Triad wouldn't partner with a nobody unless he had access to something they need. The badge is part of it, but there's more. He turned to Cassandra, his eyes searching her face. What does he know about you? What could he have told them? Nothing. I never talked about my work. He didn't even know I cleaned this building until he followed me here. But even as she said it, Cassandra felt doubt creeping in. Dante had been obsessive, jealous, the kind of man who needed to control every aspect of her life. What if he'd been watching longer than she realized? What if he knew things she'd never told him? Min Jun seemed to read her thoughts. We need to know what he's sold them. And we need to know tonight, before whatever they're planning goes into motion. He took the tablet from Jiro, his fingers flying across the screen, pulling up a live feed. The image was grainy but clear enough. Dante bound to a chair in what looked like an empty warehouse, his face bruised and swollen, two of Min Jun's men flanking him. Min Jun handed the tablet to Cassandra, and she stared at the screen, at the man who'd terrorized her for months, now reduced to a prisoner in someone else's game. She should have felt satisfaction, vindication, but all she felt was a hollow ache and the certainty that this was far from over. "I need you to make a choice." Minjun's voice was soft, almost gentle, but there was steel beneath it. "I can make him disappear. Erase him from existence so completely that no one will ever find even a trace. Or," he paused, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her skin burn. "You can come with me, face him, hear what he's sold to my enemies, and then decide his fate yourself." Cassandra's hands were shaking. The cast on her arm felt heavier than it had all day, a reminder of what Dante was capable of, what he'd already taken from her. But something in Minjun's expression made her understand that this wasn't just about revenge. This was about power. This was about proving she belonged in this world, that she could make the hard choices that came with standing beside a man like him. "I want to hear what he has to say." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "I want to know what he's done." Minjun's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it had contained any warmth. "Then we go now, together." He reached for her hand, his fingers wrapping around hers with possessive certainty. "And Cassandra, whatever happens tonight, you're mine now. Under my protection, in my world. There's no going back to invisible. They never made it to the warehouse." The building's emergency systems screamed to life 30 seconds after they stepped into the elevator, red lights flooding the confined space as the power grid collapsed. Minjun's hand shot out, catching Cassandra against his chest as the elevator lurched to a halt between floors. Emergency brakes engaging with a metallic shriek that set her teeth on edge. "They're here." His voice was calm, deadly calm, the kind of calm that came before hurricanes. He was already moving, prying open the emergency panel, accessing the manual override. The triad didn't wait. They used your badge to bypass the main security checkpoints. Cassandra's mind raced, piecing together the implications with horrifying clarity. "Dante. He was bait. They wanted us away from the building, and we walked right into it." Minjun forced the doors open, revealing the maintenance shaft and the emergency ladder that ran the length of the tower. His eyes met hers in the crimson glow, and for just a moment, she saw fear there. Not for himself, for something else. "My mother. She's still in the penthouse." The words hung between them like a death sentence. Madame Kang, the woman who'd tried to have Cassandra killed hours ago, was now trapped somewhere above them with assassins using Cassandra's stolen credentials to hunt her down. The irony was bitter and sharp, and Cassandra could see Minjun calculating odds, running through scenarios, trying to figure out how to be in two places at once. "You go to her." Cassandra's voice cut through his thoughts. "I can get there faster." His head snapped toward her, disbelief warring with pragmatism on his face. "You don't know what you're saying. These are professionals. They won't hesitate. I know this building better than anyone." She grabbed his arm, forcing him to focus on her words instead of his fear. "I've cleaned every floor, every corridor, every forgotten space for 6 months. I know the ghost paths, the maintenance routes, the ventilation systems, the service tunnels that don't show up on security maps. I can reach the penthouse through paths they don't know exist." Minjun's jaw clenched, every instinct clearly screaming at him to refuse, to keep her safe, to handle this himself the way he handled everything. But time was bleeding away, and they both knew it. The moment you see anything dangerous, you hide. You don't play hero. You survive. "I always do." She pulled away from him, already moving toward the shaft's maintenance access. "I'll get to her. You make sure there's something left of this building to come back to." He caught her hand, spinning her back toward him with enough force that she crashed against his chest. His fingers tangled in her hair, tilting her face up, and for one suspended heartbeat, she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he pressed his forehead against hers, his breath coming fast and ragged. "If you die doing this, I will burn this entire city looking for a way to bring you back just so I can kill you myself." Then he was gone, dropping down the shaft with the kind of controlled grace that came from years of practice, disappearing into the darkness below. Cassandra didn't let herself think about what that moment had meant, what the desperation in his voice implied. She just moved. The maintenance access led to a crawl space barely wide enough for her shoulders, lined with electrical conduits and HVAC piping that hummed with residual energy. Emergency lighting cast everything in blood-red shadows, turning familiar territory into something alien and threatening. But Cassandra had been invisible for so long that navigating darkness felt like coming home. She knew which pipes were hot enough to burn, which ventilation grates would hold her weight, which routes would take her up through the building's skeleton without ever touching the main floors. She moved fast, her cast scraping against metal, her breathing controlled and silent. Through the walls, she could hear muffled sounds, shouts, the crash of something heavy, the distinctive crack that might have been gunfire or might have been something breaking. The building was under siege, and somewhere in this chaos, Madame Kang was alone. The penthouse access was hidden behind a false panel in the executive washroom, a route designed for maintenance workers who needed to service the climate control without disturbing VIP residents. Cassandra emerged into darkness, cut only by the city lights filtering through the windows. The emergency power hadn't reached this level yet, which meant the attackers were working methodically, floor by floor, cutting off escape routes before moving up. Cassandra's eyes adjusted quickly. The penthouse was different in the dark. Familiar spaces transformed into a maze of shadows and potential threats. She moved through the sitting room where she'd first met Min Jun's cold assessment, through the dining room where she'd poured tea with a broken arm, searching for any sign of the woman who'd ordered her death. She found Madame Kang in the library, standing perfectly still behind a leather chair, a letter opener clutched in her hand like it was a blade from a different era. The older woman's eyes widened when Cassandra appeared from the shadows, shock and confusion warring across her face. "You." The word was barely a whisper. "How did you—" "There's no time." Cassandra crossed to her, acutely aware of how exposed they were with the windows at their back, how vulnerable. "The building's been breached. They're coming for you. We need to move." Madame Kang didn't argue, didn't question. She'd survived too long to waste time on pride when death was climbing toward her. "Where?" "Somewhere they won't think to look." Cassandra led her back toward the maintenance access, her mind already mapping alternate routes, contingency plans, the ghost paths that had always kept her safe. Somewhere only invisible people know about. They were halfway across the sitting room when the elevator chimed. Both women froze, and in the reflection of the glass walls, Cassandra saw the doors slide open, saw figures emerge with weapons drawn, saw the moment when hunting became finding. Madame Kang's hand found Cassandra's, her grip strong and steady despite the fear that must have been coursing through her veins. "The language you spoke. Lady Co taught you more than words, didn't she? She taught you to survive in courts where showing fear meant death. She taught me that the most powerful thing you can be is underestimated." Cassandra squeezed back, feeling the weight of the moment, the impossible alliance forming between them. "Now stay close and trust me." She pulled Madame Kang into the shadows, into the spaces between walls where ghosts lived, and behind them, she could hear the assassins searching, calling out in Mandarin, thinking they'd already won. But they didn't know this building like Cassandra did. They didn't know its secrets, its hidden passages, its heart, and they were about to learn that the most dangerous woman in the Kang Empire wasn't the matriarch with ice in her veins. It was the cleaner they'd never bothered to see. The maintenance tunnels led them down, not up, through a labyrinth of passages that smelled like industrial cleaner and old concrete. Cassandra could hear the assassins above them, their footsteps echoing through the ventilation system, their frustrated voices calling out coordinates as they searched room after empty room. But down here, in the forgotten veins of the building, she and Madame Kang were ghosts moving through a world that belonged to the invisible. They emerged in the sub-basement chemical storage room, Cassandra's old territory from her first month on the job. The space was vast and clinical, lined with industrial shelving units, stocked with cleaning supplies, pressurized tanks connected to the building's automated maintenance system, and equipment that could strip paint off concrete or polish marble to a mirror shine. The air was sharp with chemical bite, and the only light came from dim emergency strips along the floor. Madame Kang was breathing hard, her composure finally cracking around the edges. She looked at Cassandra with something that might have been respect, or might have been the recognition that they were both trapped in a tomb of their own making. "We can't stay here. They'll sweep every level eventually." "I know." Cassandra was already moving toward the control panel for the industrial cleaning system, her mind racing through possibilities. "But we can buy time, make them think twice about coming down here." The sound of the stairwell door slamming open cut off whatever Madame Kang might have said next. Footsteps on metal stairs, multiple people descending fast, and then voices echoing through the storage room's entrance. Cassandra recognized one of those voices immediately, and her blood turned to ice. Dante stepped into the storage room flanked by 3 men in dark tactical gear, weapons drawn but lowered in the casual confidence of predators who knew their prey was cornered. He looked different than the last time she'd seen him, harder, meaner, with the desperate edge of a man who'd sold his soul and was still waiting to see if it would be enough to save him. His eyes found Cassandra in the shadows, and his lips curved into a smile that made her stomach turn. "There's my girl." His voice was mocking, cruel in the way only someone who'd once claimed to love you could be. "Thought you could hide in your little cleaning closet forever? Thought that fancy dress and that broken arm would make you something you're not? He moved closer, and she could see the bruises on his face from wherever Minjun's people had held him, could see the wild desperation in his eyes. You're still the same scared little nobody who let me do whatever I wanted. And now you've got the old lady with you. The Triad's gonna pay me triple for bringing them both of you. Madame Kang moved slightly, positioning herself behind one of the shelving units, but Dante's men tracked the movement instantly, weapons rising. Don't. Dante's voice was sharp. You move again, and they shoot you in the spine. You'll die slow in a puddle of chemicals while Cassandra watches. Cassandra's mind was racing, cataloging every detail of the room, every piece of equipment, every advantage she'd earned from 6 months of working in spaces that people like Dante never bothered to understand. The pressurized cleaning system ran throughout the storage room, connected to nozzles mounted in the ceiling and floor, designed to spray industrial-strength solutions at high pressure for deep maintenance cleaning. The control panel was 15 feet away, protected behind a locked cage, but Cassandra had cleaned this room 100 times. She knew the emergency override was located on the wall behind her, hidden behind a false panel that looked like part of the concrete. You broke my arm. Her voice was steady, each word carefully measured. Crushed it against a railing because you were too weak to face your own failures. Then you sold me out to people who wanted to use me to destroy the one place that gave me safety. Dante laughed, the sound echoing off metal and concrete. Safety? You think cleaning floors for the mob is safety? You're delusional, Cassie. You always were, living in your little fantasy world where hard work and keeping your head down would somehow save you. He was close now, close enough that she could smell the sweat and fear on him, could see the tremor in his hands that came from drugs or terror or both. But that's over now. You're going to tell these nice men everything you know about the building's security, about Minjun's operations, about all those pretty secrets you must have heard while you were invisible, and then maybe, if you're real cooperative, they'll make it quick. I don't think so. Cassandra's hand shot out, slamming against the false panel with her good arm, fingers finding the emergency override switch that maintenance workers used when the automated system failed. The response was immediate and catastrophic. Every nozzle in the ceiling and floor activated simultaneously, releasing pressurized streams of industrial cleaning solution mixed with chemical fog agents designed to fill large spaces for deep sanitation. The room exploded into chaos. The chemical fog billowed out in thick white clouds, blinding and disorienting, while high-pressure jets of cleaning solution hammered down from above with enough force to knock grown men off their feet. Dante's men shouted, firing blindly into the fog, but Cassandra was already moving. She knew this room, knew every pipe and shelf and clear path, knew exactly where to step to avoid the worst of the spray. She grabbed Madame Kang's arm and pulled her toward the reinforced storage cage where the most dangerous chemicals were kept, a space designed to be airtight and protected from the very system she'd just activated. Behind them, she could hear Dante screaming her name, could hear his men choking on chemical fog, could hear the distinctive crack of weapons firing and the metallic ping of bullets hitting concrete and pipes. The fog was so thick now that visibility was measured in inches, and the pressure system showed no signs of shutting down. Cassandra had triggered a full-cycle emergency cleaning protocol that would run for 10 minutes unless manually overridden, and the override panel was on the other side of the room, unreachable through the maelstrom. They made it to the cage, Cassandra's fingers working the combination lock by memory, and collapsed inside just as a figure emerged from the fog, Dante soaking wet and furious, his weapon raised but shaking in his hands. His men were down, incapacitated by the chemical assault or the confusion or both, but he was still standing, still desperate, still dangerous. You think you're smart? He was screaming now, his voice raw. You think this changes anything? I'll kill you both and drag your bodies out of here myself. Cassandra looked at him through the cage's reinforced mesh. This man who'd terrorized her for months, who'd broken her arm and sold her safety for his own survival, and she felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. She reached for a shard of broken glass from a shattered cleaning solution bottle, the edge sharp enough to cut, and stepped back out of the cage. You're not going to touch either of us. Her voice was different now, carrying the weight of the royal dialect she'd spoken hours ago, carrying the authority of someone who'd survived things Dante couldn't imagine. Because I'm done being your victim. I'm done being anyone's ghost. She moved toward him through the thinning fog, her good arm extended, the glass shard catching the emergency light like a promise. Dante raised his weapon, but his hands were shaking too badly, his eyes burning from chemicals, his confidence evaporating in the face of a woman he'd never actually known. The stairwell door slammed open for the second time, and Minjun burst through like a force of nature. He took in the scene instantly, the disabled men, the chemical chaos, Cassandra standing over Dante with a weapon in her hand and ice in her eyes. And the expression that crossed his face wasn't shock or fear. It was raw, devastating pride. Cassandra. His voice cut through the remaining fog. Step back. Let me handle this. But she didn't move. Didn't lower the glass. Just kept her eyes locked on Dante while she spoke to Minjun. He's mine. My debt to settle. Minjun approached slowly, carefully, until he was standing beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Then settle it. Whatever you choose, I'll support. Queen decides the fate of pawns. That's how this works. Cassandra looked at the man who'd hurt her, who'd tried to destroy her, who'd sold her for pieces of silver, and she realized that killing him would be mercy, letting him live with the knowledge that she'd become everything he'd never seen in her that was power. Take him. She dropped the glass, the sound of it shattering against concrete final and absolute. Turn him over to the authorities with evidence of everything he's done. Let him rot in a cell knowing I'm the one who survived. Minjun's hand found hers, bloody and chemical burned and perfect. As you command. The lobby of the Kang Plaza looked like a battlefield dressed in marble and glass. Emergency crews were restoring power floor by floor, and Minjun's security team moved through the space with military efficiency, securing the perimeter and cataloging the breach. But when Cassandra stepped out of the service elevator with Madame Kang at her side, every single person stopped. Even Jiro, who'd looked at her with professional disdain just hours ago, went absolutely still. Then he bowed. Not a casual nod of acknowledgement, but a full formal bow, the kind reserved for those who carried authority that transcended rank. And one by one, every guard, every operative, every person in Minjun's employ followed suit. They were bowing to the woman who'd saved the matriarch, the woman who'd spoken the language of lost royalty, the woman who'd turned a cleaning supply room into a weapon and emerged victorious. Cassandra felt the weight of their recognition like a physical thing, pressing down on her shoulders, demanding she carry it with grace. She looked at Minjun, who stood near the security desk with his phone pressed to his ear, coordinating the aftermath. When his eyes met hers across the lobby, she saw something in them that made her breath catch. Pride, possession, promise. Madame Kang's hand touched her elbow, the gesture almost gentle. You could have left me. Saved yourself. Instead, you risked everything for a woman who ordered your death. The older woman's voice was quiet, meant only for Cassandra's ears. That's not survival. That's honor. And honor is the rarest currency in our world. I didn't do it for you. Cassandra's honesty was instinctive. I did it because Minjun would have destroyed himself trying to save you. And I couldn't watch that happen. Something shifted in Madame Kang's expression, a softening that made her look almost human. Then you understand what it means to love a Kang. We don't do anything halfway. Not empire building, not loyalty, not love. And my son, she paused, her eyes moving to where Minjun was now walking toward them, his stride purposeful and predatory. My son has already decided you're his. The question is whether you're brave enough to survive what that means. Before Cassandra could respond, Minjun was there, his presence overwhelming everything else. He looked at his mother first, checking for injuries, for signs of trauma, his control slipping just enough that Cassandra could see the fear he'd been carrying. You're safe. Because of her. Madame Kang's tone brooked no argument. This girl fought for me when she had every reason to let me die. That makes her family by the old codes. That makes her untouchable. Minjun's eyes moved to Cassandra, and the intensity there nearly buckled her knees. I know what she is. I've known since she spoke words that should have died a century ago. He reached for her hand, his fingers wrapping around hers with the kind of possessive certainty that sent heat racing through her veins. Come with me. We need to talk. He led her away from the lobby, away from the stairs and the aftermath, into the private elevator that carried them back to the penthouse. The ride was silent, charged with everything they hadn't said, everything that had changed between them in the space of a single night. When the doors opened, Minjun didn't release her hand, just pulled her through the sitting room, past the dining room where she'd poured tea and survived judgment, onto the balcony where the city spread below them like a conquered kingdom. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, and in that golden light, Cassandra could see the exhaustion etched into Minjun's features, the toll of a night spent fighting for his empire, for his mother, for her. He turned to face her, still holding her hand, and with his free hand, he traced the edge of the cast on her arm with devastating gentleness. This is where it started. His voice was rough, scraped raw with emotion. You, broken and desperate, texting a dead man's phone because you had nowhere else to turn. Me, finding you in the dark and realizing I'd just stumbled onto something I couldn't control. His fingers moved from the cast to her wrist, feeling her pulse jump beneath his touch. I told you that you'd become the most dangerous woman in this city. I didn't know how right I was. Cassandra's throat was tight. I'm still just... Don't. The word was sharp, almost desperate. Don't diminish what you are. You saved my mother. You stopped an attack using nothing but knowledge and courage. You spoke a language that brought grown men to their knees. You stood over your abuser with a weapon in your hand and chose mercy over revenge. His other hand came up to cup her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. You're not just anything. You're extraordinary. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure nothing and no one ever breaks you again. The words hit her like a vow, like a brand, like the kind of promise that changed the architecture of your soul. Cassandra felt tears burning behind her eyes, felt the careful walls she'd built around herself crumbling in the face of his intensity. You don't know me. Not really. You don't know where I come from or what I've survived or... Then tell me. He pulled her closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his body, could see the flecks of bronze in his dark eyes, could taste the possibility of what came next. Tell me everything. Every scar, every secret, every piece of yourself you've kept hidden. I want all of it. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words died when she saw his expression shift, his attention caught by something over her shoulder. Cassandra turned to follow his gaze and saw his phone vibrating on the balcony table, the screen lighting up with an incoming message. But it wasn't his regular phone. It was the ghost line device, the one that had started everything when she'd accidentally texted it from the storage room. Minjun picked it up, his jaw tightening as he read the message. Then he went absolutely still, the kind of stillness that preceded earthquakes. He looked at Cassandra, and there was something in his expression that made her blood run cold. Fear, shock, and beneath it all, a dawning realization that changed everything. What is it? Her voice came out barely above a whisper. He turned the phone toward her, and she read the words that would shatter her carefully invisible life into pieces she'd never be able to reassemble. The princess is found. Initiate phase 2. Cassandra's world tilted. I don't understand. What princess? What phase? Minjun's hand found hers again, gripping tight enough to hurt. Lady Sao Yeon-hee, the woman who taught you the royal dialect. She wasn't just a lady-in-waiting to the last empress. His voice was strained, each word clearly costing him something. She was the empress's personal guardian. And the child she smuggled out of Korea during the fall, the princess who disappeared and was presumed dead. He paused, his eyes searching her face like he was seeing her for the first time. Her name was recorded in the old documents as Seo Mi-jin. But names can be changed. Identities can be buried. And if Lady Seo taught you that dialect, if she chose you out of everyone in that nursing home to carry that knowledge forward, no. Cassandra was shaking her head, backing away from the implications, from the impossibility of what he was suggesting. That's insane. I'm nobody. I'm a cleaner from Chicago. My parents died when I was young. I grew up in foster care. I have no connection to any of this. Your parents died, or that's what you were told. Minjun moved toward her, relentless in his logic. But what if they didn't die? What if they disappeared? What if someone very powerful wanted to make sure the last living heir to the Korean throne never knew what she was? The phone buzzed again. Another message. We've been watching. We've been waiting. Now she knows enough to be dangerous. Bring her in or eliminate her. Those are your only options, Silent Viper. Minjun looked at the message, then at Cassandra, and she saw him make a choice in real time. He deleted the message, powered down the phone, and threw it off the balcony. They watched it